Um, Thank you so much for joining us today, Magda and David. My name is Matthias. I'm the programs director at All Outs. So I'm planning the campaigns that our organization is doing around the world. Among those, we have done a lot of work over the last year together with Polish activists to react to what is happening in Poland on the ground. The attacks from the right wing and attacks on prides last year, the proclamation of so-called LGBT-free zones in several regions and cities around the country. And very recently, over the last few weeks, we have seen continuous attacks on the LGBT+ community in Poland, as recently as last week when the Polish President Duda again confirmed his views on the community, again lashed out and sent comments out to the news. I just will quickly introduce the guests today before we move to the discussion. As I said, I'm hoping for two more panelists to join. Let's see if they can join us in a moment. So we have here today with us Magda Dropek, who is the co-organizer of the Queer May Festival and the Equality March in Kraków in Poland, and a board member of the Equality.pl Foundation. Is that right, Magda?
Hello.
Hey, great to have you here today. And we have here with us today David Wojtyczka, an activist and fundraiser for DOMEK, Krakow's Equality Center, which is run by the Federation of Equality Science. And he's a Pride Network chairperson for the State Street Bank in Poland. Welcome, David.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much both for joining. So I think I will kick it off with a general question, just to cover some of the things that have been happening in Poland over the last year or so. So as I mentioned, since 2019, the number of Polish municipalities and towns that have declared themselves LGBT-free zones has risen to about 100. This means that about a third of Poland is now affected by policies that have really just one goal: to exclude Polish LGBT+ people from society and to declare them enemies of the state, basically. So I would be curious to hear from both of you what the effects of this policy are on LGBT people who live in those regions, and how this has impacted their lives. Because we hear a lot about the legal issue and how we hear a lot about that from Western media, but it would be great to hear from you, from your own experience, and of course from you talking to LGBT people in those towns, how this is really affecting their lives. Whoever wants to kick it off.
Okay. Once again, thank you for having me. And when it comes to current situation in Poland, well, we are broadcasting live from the middle of LGBT-free zone. So from one hand, well, the third part of our country considers me as a person who should not be living there, and I should be excluded because I'm not a human, but the ideology. This is what my proud president said to myself via media a couple of days ago. How does it impact our people? Unfortunately, today we've got another terrible news about Michał, a person my age, who hanged himself. He hanged himself because he was bullied in school, and he just couldn't resist it anymore. So this is the reality we are facing, and this is the price we are paying because our president and our country, and our country is really going in a very wrong direction. I can say that I am living in a bubble. I've got amazing friends, and we are running a place where everyone can feel safe. But unfortunately, this is only a bubble. And another article about a person who killed himself because of homophobia. This is unfortunately the reality that we are currently living.
Thank you, David, and sorry to hear this news. This is very heartbreaking, and it's incredibly sad to hear something like this. And it just really goes to show that this is not just a theoretical thing we're talking about, but it's really affecting human beings. It's really affecting people's lives, and it drives them in situations where they see no way out, which is incredibly sorry to hear. Magda, would you like to add a little bit from your own experience?
First, I think that today we have a very strong Krakow's team, which is not so usual when it comes for events like this. So I'm glad that our voice can also be heard. So thank you for that. In fact, thank you for invitation. Just as David said, it's for example, in Lesser Poland Voivodeship, where Krakow is based, we have an LGBT-free zone for over a year now. And I think that we have to divide two things. One thing is LGBT-free zones, and the second thing are the family charters, which also appeared in the second part of the 2019 year. To be honest, we still don't know what will the impact when it comes, for example, on the law thing, but because they are very symbolic still. But from the other hand, I feel that we still will face what will happen. For example, last year, my foundation, which is doing some kind of LGBT activism in smaller cities in the southern part of Poland, we are trying to empower, support, and work with LGBT community in smaller cities. We were trying to make a movie screening directed by Bart, who is not with us, unfortunately, about the lack of marriage equality and civil partnerships in Poland. And we tried to do it in one of the public institutions in a small city next to Krakow called Kalwaria Żydowska. And we've heard that there is no place for ideological or political events like this in this institution. But two months later, there was a very homophobic conference there funded by public money. We asked, of course, the director of the institution, what is the definition of ideological and political events by them, but we haven't heard the answer. I went with my friend for the conference, and it was 4 hours of LGBT witch hunt, to be honest, the worst myths and fake news about our community. The local authorities invited directors of schools, teachers, the clergy from there, the local authorities from other smaller cities around. So there was a lot of important people there who listened a lot of bad things about us. So I think that it will be the impact, that it will be easier, for example, for public institutions to say to us that there is no place for you in for example, places like this. But from the other hand, I always trying to be optimistic in everything what is happening, especially in the last year. One of the impact is also the fact that last year we had a record number of equality marches in Poland. And also in Krakow, our march, our pride was 2 weeks after the local authorities declared Lesser Poland Voivodeship as a LGBT-free zone. And we had over 2,000 people on our pride. So I think that it's also something about the wake-up call for civil society, but also for our community.
I think, yeah, this you're tapping into a very interesting point there, Magda, and that is actually something I wanted to discuss a little bit more. So, when you see when you look at what's happening in Poland at the moment from the outside, let's say, the news that most people follow, not Polish local news, but what's being reported outside of the country. We hear a lot of bad news. We hear, obviously, a lot about the LGBT-free zones. We hear about the comments by President Duda. We hear about some of the horrific things that happened during the Prides or equality marches last year. But what we don't hear so much really is the resistance and the amazing work that activists are doing, and not only activists, but really the community and many supporters and even allies across the country who are supporting the community. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more maybe about what your feeling is. As you mentioned, I think there were more equality marches, more pride marches than ever before last year, right? Which is incredible and such an interesting development, seeing as there's so much resistance coming from the right. When you look at the overall population, do you think that these extreme anti-LGBT views that are being proposed by the right-wing parties and by right-wing activists, do they have support overall in the population, or do you think that overall Poland has become a more open-minded society towards LGBT people over the last decades? Maybe Magda or David, whoever has some.
Okay, I can start because when we are doing things with community on a local level, also in the smaller cities, I always say that I believe that politicians are far more homophobic than the Polish people are, and that the society is far more open than politicians. And it's more about some kind of projection of politicians that Polish people are homophobic and closed-minded. So I think that especially in the last week, we can see that there was a lot of outrage publicly about what happened and about the politicians, the ruling party politicians' words. So, but as I said at the beginning, I'm always trying to look for the positive things of everything what is happening. And the last 5 years, when we look at all things which happened, it was important thing also when it comes, for example, for the civil society, when it comes for the climate movement, when it comes for the also ally movement, for all the pro-democracy movements. There was a lot of rainbow flags, for example, on the rallies which happened in the last years. So it was also opportunity for community to show that we are also Polish citizens. We are also want to defend democracy. We defend our forests. We defend our public media. We want to defend media because it's also affect us and it's also important for us. So I think that people, Polish citizens, also had the opportunity to see us as the part of society. So I think it was also something good that happened in the last years. And also we need to remember that in 2015, ruling party, it's always easy to build politics on fear. So in 2015, Law and Justice Party put a spotlight on refugees because there was a refugee crisis in Europe. And in 2019, they didn't have refugees in Poland, so they put spotlight on us.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you make there. That the right wing seems to always look for an enemy they can use to build a narrative around, especially when when elections are coming up, which is the case now again. You mentioned the most recent developments, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, but just wanted to call out to everyone who's attending right now. I see we have a great big group of attendees who are watching us right now. So thank you everyone for joining. It's really great that we're getting more people interested about the situation in Poland and participating in this conversation. I just wanted to call out that there's a Q&A button in Zoom if you are joining us on the Zoom webinar, where you can ask your questions, and we will get to those questions later. If you have anything you would like to ask David and Magda, please drop us a question here. Also, for those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, please drop your questions in the comments, and we will try to get to those a little bit later in this chat. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what has happened recently. We have the presidential elections coming up this Sunday, right? So in just a few days, and again, the Polish right has picked the LGBT community as their main enemy and scapegoat. I just wanted to call out some of the comments that Andrzej Duda, the president, has made over the last few days. They've really made big news internationally. He pledged to, in quotes, defend children from the LGBT ideology, as he calls it. He has launched the so-called Family Charter, which includes prohibiting the propagation of LGBT ideology in schools, which sounds very similar to the anti-gay propaganda law in Russia, to be completely honest. And Duda has also made the comment that the so-called LGBT ideology, as he calls it, is worse than communism. And as you mentioned, Magda, this has caused some irritation, not only outside of Poland, but even in the population in Poland. I think this has been on major news everywhere, really. So I just wanted to maybe hear a little bit more from you on the reactions from in the population. You already talked a little bit about that, and also in the community, if there's anything you are trying to mobilize against these comments, especially before the election, and how the community, but also the general population is reacting to that. Maybe David, if you want to.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. You asked before also about if the situation of LGBT in Poland, how the society is looking at it. From latest polls, we saw that 60% of people has no problem and accepts legal partnerships of same-sex couples. 60% of people asked, and I think, as I remember, 40% marriage equality. So definitely it's not the right-wing party that is ruling currently is not showing the voice of people in our country. So this is why we are sure that we are fighting for a good cause, not only for our imaginary actions. What happened after those words? My first opinion is that the campaign overshoot with the statement that LGBT people are ideology. As Magda said previously, they targeted refugees. However, let's simplify that. They were people not from Poland. And currently, they actually targeted someone in Poland. And there was a huge outburst about that words. Even if we don't accept gay people, we are talking about our neighbors. And I think that many people that didn't have any opinion on the LGBT situation in Poland were really angry with that words. And the anger was shown. Last Sunday, there was a meeting with Andrzej Duda on Krakow's main square market. It was raining terribly. However, so many people were protesting with rainbow flags. It was impossible to feel the power of these people. So yeah, there is a huge outbreak. People, I think, from the community are mobilized and have never been more mobilized than they are today as a target of presidential campaign.
To add, Magda? Yeah, go ahead.
If I can add something, it's also about the young people. I think that it started in 2019 with all the number of equality marches in smaller cities, also where we saw a lot of young people. And for me, as a person who is like co-organizing equality march in Krakow in the last 8 years. For me, like the Sunday rally was really amazing because there was a lot of people I don't know for the first time in many years, that there are so many new faces and so many young faces also. So I think that it's also important that a lot of young people engaged now, and they are like, and also like young people when it comes to allies, because it's for them, it's like impossible that in the center of Europe, in European Europe, like the president of the country is saying things like this about their friends, their families, people they care of.
Yeah, that's great to hear that more and more support is coming from young people, and that there are also allies joining those marches and giving support. And I hope that this is, this is I think incredibly important to see especially for those young LGBT folks who have not been able to come out yet, who are too afraid to come out because they live in environments where it's just not possible. They're afraid to come out to their own parents or their own communities. So maybe moving further, just because the elections are coming up this weekend, and I think it would be interesting for some of our guests here today to hear a little bit more about the political context, political landscape in Poland. So we know that the government, the national government, very strongly opposes LGBT rights, and is supported by conservative groups and regions, and some local governments have been quite supportive, right? We know that the mayor of Warsaw, as a matter of fact, Trzaskowski, is an LGBT ally, and he has even signed the LGBT+ declaration, which aims at fighting discrimination on the LGBT community last year, I think. So I'd be curious to hear if you think there's hope that the political tide will change and that these pro-LGBT voices will become stronger, and what your hopes are for the elections maybe as well. Magda, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I really regret that Krzysztof is not with us, but I can imagine that now it's really crazy time for him because of the campaign. Since the beginning of the 2019, I'm also trying to engage politically a bit in our country. And when it comes to political scene, I think that it's also important to notice that we have like a openly gay candidate, Robert Biedroń, and especially in last week, we saw how important it is to have an openly gay politician who was like also reacted for what was happening publicly. But when it comes for a political scene in Poland also, now we have in our Sejm, our parliament, we have 49 members of parliament of the leftist coalition, in which I'm also trying to be engaged, and I'm supporting also in Kraków. And so we have not only like openly gay members of parliament like Krzysztof, or also like two bisexual women, but we also have a lot of allies. For the first time in many years, there is so many LGBT allies in our parliament. And in the last Friday, as a reaction for what is happening in Poland, the leftist coalition prepared by also the activists, one of the organizations, Love Does Not Exclude, the bill about marriage equality and the bill about civil partnerships. So it was like a very historic moment, because for the first time in Polish parliament there is a bill about marriage equality with adoption and everything, what is like, a very hot topic in Poland now. So I engaged because for many of my friends it was like very surprised. It was surprised that an activist wanted to engage into dirty politics. But for many years in my activism, I've heard that if we want to change something, we also be visible in the politics, and we have to also have our own voice. So a lot of LGBT people also in Poland engaged last year in Robert Biedroń's movement, Spring Party, which now is the part of the leftist coalition in parliament, as also like a sign of hope and sign of change. And I think that it's also like it's only a year, so I think that something is happening, and the polls are showing that the leftist coalition have between 10 or 30, 40%. So I think it's also like a hope for me that something on the political scene can change. But when it comes for the conservative and also centrist, which is also very important, because I said last year this one on one of the debates that I'm not afraid of the conservatives or the homophobic politicians in Poland. I'm afraid of the centrists, for example, who are not brave enough to stand out for us, for example. And it's something which is really terrifying me when it comes for the political scene, because I believe that we are living in the times when we really need brave politicians who are be able to answer all the challenges we have, like not only like the human rights, but also like when it comes for the climate crisis. So I think that a lot of things is changing, and now we are also at a very important moment of history, especially after COVID, still during the COVID-19 situation, that it's really important to be vocal and to be visible, and also to be on the right side of history.
Yeah, I think it's important to see that in the context of the COVID-19 crisis and what's what we have seen over the last few months. David, anything you would like to add to that? Otherwise, I could pick a question from one of our attendees, but go ahead if you have another comment on this.
Thank you. When it comes to upcoming elections, that's a fact that it's really great moment that we've got an openly gay candidate, and I support the fact that in Poland, during such historical changes, because I think that the history is actually writing itself currently with all of the acts here. I'm really happy that we've got such representation in our parliament, and actually openly gay candidate. So that's a great moment, and I'm looking for more. Even though when the polls are not so optimistic, I think that
I think we have just lost David for a moment. Sure, he will be reconnecting again. Right, he's been dropping off and on for a moment. Okay, we'll just wait for David to come back. And maybe in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about one of the questions that has been shared. Oh, sorry, David, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, I've got some technical difficulties. So yeah, fantastic moment and a moment of change. Thank you.
It's great to hear some optimism, and that some things are hopefully changing for the better, or it seems like there are certain developments happening that might become a bigger positive story over the next few months and next years, depending on how the elections come out in the next few years, I guess. One question here asked by MB on the Q&A is the question on marriage equality. They asked, the foregrounding of marriage equality was a problem in the West and displaced other issues like race, refugees, etc. It also made single LGBT plus more vulnerable. What do you think about the struggle for marriage equality in Poland? So I think that is an interesting question, because I understand, right now, the focus seems very much on defending the LGBT community from the attacks that are coming from the right wing. But I know that marriage equality is something that the community is working on and fighting for. And you mentioned, Magda, that there is support in the overall population for marriage equality. So maybe just a few more thoughts on that, if any of you could talk about this. Like, where are we in Poland in terms of the fight for marriage equality, in terms of priorities? And what are the next steps, and what do you think about that question, whether the fight for marriage equality could put some of the LGBT community at harm or in the focus and more vulnerable? Magda, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that looking what is happening in Europe and all over the world is like it's time for marriage equality. Of course, in Poland, the discussion is difficult, mostly, in my opinion, mostly because of the Catholic Church and the discourse which Catholic Church put around the marriage. So I think maybe it's not my kind of like a discourse, but I think it's also important to put out that there is nothing more conservative than marriage equality, because it's a very conservative like slogan. So I think it's also important to remind this. But I think that in the moment in which we are, it's like should be just done. It's not something we should debate on, because we are debating in the last 10, 15, 20 years about the civil partnership. So I think it's just time, and it should be just done by politicians. But I think for me, as an activist, the most important thing is education now, because of the young people who are the most affected by what is happening, and all the hate speech and all the violence. They are the most fragile part of the society. But also, I think what is important is novelization of penal code when it comes for the hate crimes and hate speech, because it's still not done in Poland, to be honest. So I think that those things for me are the most important. But also when it comes for the marriage equality, there is a lot of discussion around the Constitution and the famous Article 18. And the lawyers are divided when it comes for is it possible to have a marriage equality in Poland or not. We have also maybe less famous, my favorite Article 32 of Constitution, which says that no one should be discriminated, and especially by public authorities, and everyone should be equal. So I think that it's also a discussion like it's for example, when we look at Poland in the last years and what our ruling party did to constitution, for example, and did for democracy, and how they treated the constitution, it's for me is always like it's a hypocrisy. I don't know how to say it in English, this word, sorry, that when it comes for the defending marriage, they always say about the Article 18, but when it comes for democracy or constitution, they don't treat this constitution as the Article 18 so seriously.
Well, I see that David is having some technical issues, so maybe we can just continue chatting about this a little bit more, Magda. You mentioned that education is an important issue for you, and I think that's really interesting, because that seems to also be something that the right is focusing on, right? Like Duda and his family charter is very much focused around the idea that they want to ban any mentioning of LGBT issues in schools. They think that creates an environment where the so-called ideology is being told in little kids' heads and so on. So I think my question is how, if I agree this is a very central issue to make sure that the next generation understands what the LGBT community is, who the LGBT community is, what the issues are that affect the community. So what are activists like yourself and other activists who are working in the field doing to make sure that this becomes or stays a part of the education in the future?
To be honest, with my organizations, we are not focused on education as much. We are focused more about, as I said earlier, about empowering, strengthening communities on the local levels, but also community organizing around, for example, what we do in Kraków. Last year there was also during the COVID-19. There was a lot of talking around sexual education in Poland, which is some kind of, also a reason for the ruling party to say that sexual education is only about teaching people about the LGBT ideology, as you said. Last year we did, there was the first try in our parliament to ban sexual educators from teaching in schools about sexual education. There was a lot of protests and rallies in Poland. We also did one in Krakow. So they hide it a bit for a moment. And there was another try during the COVID-19. It was at the middle of the April. So it was also a challenge for us because it was impossible to go out and on the streets and rally. So there was a lot of protests and rallies in the online, to be honest, and a lot of also media are very important for us when it comes to put spotlight on some kind of issues which are important. What is happening also around, I think, in my opinion and my observation and my activism, what is happening also is very important things when it comes to being supported and support of also, for example, the feminist movements. Because it happened in Poland that it's very often with the tries of banning an abortion or the attack on reproductive rights in Poland. So during April, there was a lot of the ally of the LGBT movement and the women's movement. So I think that it's also very important that a lot of different part of the social scene are working together when it comes to defend our rights, for example, to education. So the thing which I said earlier about the young people engaged also in the last year in many things when it comes to LGBT community, for example, might be also connected with the education, because it will affect mostly young people. So they are defending their rights to education, to not to be indoctrinated, to be educated. So I think it's also from this point of view.
I think we have lost David, unfortunately. I hope he will be able to come back. So it's just the two of us for now, Magda, but I'm very happy that you're here, and thanks for joining. Also, thanks for joining for everyone who is participating here as an attendee who's joining us. I see we have a lot of people on the feed, and we get a lot of questions. We will not be able to get to all of them. But I want to pick out something else, and there are a few questions around the LGBT-free zones. I think it is a concept that for many people is just difficult to understand. We hear a lot about it, and it sounds like an incredibly scary development to see more and more municipalities join this construct. And I see that several attendees have asked what the actual impacts are on the daily life for a queer person living in those zones. Maybe for you also from your activism experience, whether it has any impact on your community work that you do, that's, that label of LGBT-free zones. I also want to mention here that Bartosz Staszewski, who cannot join us here today, who is a filmmaker and photojournalist. Unfortunately, he's sending his apologies. He cannot join us here today. He created a photo series of Polish LGBT+ people who live in LGBT-free zones that has caught global attention. And I would really recommend for everyone to Google Bartosz Staszewski's name, and you will find the stories about that. It's a very moving and interesting project to highlight that in those LGBT-free zones, there are obviously a lot of people who identify as LGBT and who feel intimidated by these policies. But maybe Magda, we can talk a little bit more about this concept of LGBT-free zones and what it actually means for a queer person to live in those areas and what it means for your work.
I think it depends on the region. For example, in a southern part of Poland, there is a lot of LGBT-free zones initiatives and family charters also. And you know, for me, I live in Krakow, which is my home by choice and by privilege also, because I was born in a smaller city, 100 kilometers from Krakow, with which I'm very like connected, and I like to come back there. So I think it's different for someone like me who is living in a big city, quite multicultural and with a very diverse history and with a lot of tourists. Maybe not now because of the pandemic, but usually. So for us, when it all started, for example, with my foundation, because it all started before the European elections last year. For us, it was like important to react, and for example, we did a few campaigns, or we were trying to interest local media, for example, in the topic. So it's also like was the opportunity for us to like put spotlight on LGBT issues, for example, in smaller cities like in Kalwaria Żydowska, where our billboard, we had a billboard with the slogan, "We are here to remind that LGBT people are everywhere." So it was destroyed 2 times. So it wasn't so easy. But in Krakow, it's it's always difficult to speak with the local authorities about this, because very often they don't even understand what they are, for example, voting for. So that's why I said earlier that I don't believe that all the people in Poland are homophobic, for example, because sometimes it's just more about like lack of knowledge or the fear when it comes for something which is different from them. So yeah, I think that it's different in Krakow and it's different in the smaller cities. But what is happening, and I'm sorry if I'm like, my English is not perfect, so sorry, but we are really tired, you know?
It's something absolutely that perfect.
I think that David can like relate to this, that we are really tired, because it's like burning out our energy, because there's so many things happening, and it's so difficult sometimes to react, and you want to do something, and sometimes you don't know what to do, to be honest. And people are writing to us. For example, I'm trying to be active on Twitter, and a lot of young people are writing to me, mostly from the LGBT-free zones. And it's not that it's affecting, as I said, there still are like more on a symbolic way, symbolic, you know, the side of the bills, but like the knowledge that you are excluded from the local communities by the local authority. And for example, for me, it's horrifying that I live in Krakow, which is very open, or trying to be, because for example, we have a council of the equal treatment established last year in the city, and we are trying to do there something like positive for the community also, or put spotlight on the anti-discrimination things. But it's everything is happening in, you know, in an area in which you are not like welcome to, you are not like, you know, included. And of course, I know there is a lot of people around who don't think this way, but it's difficult, you know. Sometimes I just wake up in the morning and I'm just like so tired, and I'm wondering if it makes sense. So it's really everything, every single like initiative like this in the region is just another thing which is like burning out our energy to do anything. So I think it's also an idea for homophobic politicians in Poland to do things like this, because it's like, you know, difficult for a movement even, especially now after COVID-19, which we are still like facing the crisis, and we don't know what will happen. We are not sure about the future. So it's difficult to react if we were like sitting at homes, and we've heard that there's some kind of council is thinking about the family charter and what we can do. We can like assign a petition. We can try to call to the authorities. We can like try to interest the local media. But it's difficult for me. I think that we can give voice to David as he appeared. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Magda, and thank you also for being so honest about how tiring this situation is, and how tiring it can be for activists and for community leaders who try to work against this constant wave of discrimination. I think, you know, everyone here attending this chat will agree that we have so much respect for all the work that activists like you two do in Poland, and we're following you and hoping we are able to support you in some way, and we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, maybe David, I think great that you're back. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your work at Domek. That's one of the projects that you work on, and David and I had the honor to work on a project a few months back where all our members helped support Domek with a crowdfunding campaign to support that work that the community center is doing. So maybe you can talk just a little bit more, because Magda just talked about the community and how, you know, it's important that people stick together and support each other. So maybe just, you know, your center, I think, is a great example of how that can happen, and how you have created a place for people to come together and support each other. So maybe a few words about what you do, and what kind of support people are looking for who come to the center, and what your plans are for the future with that project.
Sure, thank you, and good to be back. Technical difficulties, sorry. Yeah, as I mentioned before, middle of the LGBT zone, but still we are running one of the biggest and one and only LGBTQ community center around our place. We opened actually last year. It was the first year we are operating, and we worked so hard for 6 years to open the community center, and finally we did it, and we celebrated the first day just last week. What we do is, our aim is to build strong community. We are just opening for people. We are giving them safe space, just a place to rest where they can feel accepted. They feel loved. We are creating the family of choice for them, and a place when we all spend time. So this is our top priority, to have strong and really connected community in Kraków and around. We also have psychological support and legal aid support and support groups for all the matters that we can support. We can provide any help, and it's being run by our volunteers. So we are doing our best to provide help mainly to youth people, to young people, because they are really targeted by all the boards. And I don't want to think what would happen if actually COVID-19 would not close the schools. So I'm absolutely terrified. What could happen if young people during the school breaks would be bullied because of the president who said the ideology, and we know it happens. So the one good part, what I'm trying to think of, is they're more safe at home. So yeah, building community is our top priority, and I'm really happy that it was the first year that we were operating. When it comes to the numbers, 250 events or counselings or support groups with more than 3,500 people. That's our summary for the year. So yeah, few people around Kraków opened the community center, and we see it was needed, and people are coming, and this is what gives me power to work.
That's great. Thank you, David. I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in, and a lot of people have asked similar questions around, obviously they would love to help somehow. And I think that is the feeling that many of us have who are not in the country. What are the best ways you would suggest, both of you, for people around the world to support the Polish community right now? What can we do to elevate the voices in Poland, to help the community, to help, you know, contribute to increase the pressure on politicians who are voicing messages against the LGBT community. What's the best way our energy is channeled to support you too?
I can continue and give Magda a break. Well, we are really happy that we have such wonderful advocates for our cause. So spreading the news about what's happening in Poland and the true information is something really important. Media are looking at us. I hope the authorities will start looking at us more and more, and they will take action. So the first thing, you are already doing that. So thank you for giving us the voice and the space to share what we do and why we do it and what's the real situation here. And well, as most of our country, the third part of our country is the LGBT-free zones. All organizations are struggling with financing. Currently, we are safe to the end of the year. However, there are small organizations that are struggling with that. So you can look for any NGOs and not maybe target the biggest ones, but support some smaller ones that most probably struggle with financing, because we don't have any money from our authorities. So we need to look for external financing that we are doing, or professionalization, which we are trying to do as well.
Thank you, David. Magda, would you like to add anything?
I can only agree with David that like spreading the news, giving us the voice for example, in situations like today. So thank you for this. But also write to your politicians, to your ombudsmans, to institutions, and point out what is happening. There is an idea in Poland, for example, about writing to sister cities and to breaking up the partnerships. I'm not a fan of this idea because I know that people are left behind in those places where the partnership is done. So for me, it's more important to put a pressure on the local authorities and to invite them for workshops or show solidarity with the local communities. For me, it's also important. And as David said, we have 2 or 3 organizations in Poland which are professional ones. Most of us are doing our activism in a free time. So especially in a crisis situation, it's difficult for us because first we have to handle our income, for example. So I'm afraid what will happen, it will be difficult for our NGOs, especially on a local level. So the next few months, we will see what will happen. Every a gesture of solidarity is also important, because I've seen how it was important for community when there was, for example, letter of solidarity from the institutions or from the organizations or from the group. It is important for us because we feel that we are not left alone, and that are people who care about our well-being and our life also, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to call out that there are a few things that All Out has been working on with some of the organizations in Poland, with Kampania Przeciw Homofobii, campaign against homophobia, for instance. So for those of you who are joining us here, those attendees who haven't signed those petitions or haven't participated in those actions, this is one of the things that you can do as a start to support the Polish community. I just wanted to quickly share those petitions, those actions with you really quickly. So this is, you'll find this petition under allout.org/Poland. If you haven't signed yet, please join us in asking the European Commission to speak up and support the Polish LGBT community. Magda, you have also mentioned that there are questions or requests to support to partner cities of Polish LGBT-free zones. We have actually also a campaign that we're running with Pulse of Europe. That's another campaign currently, where we are asking those partner cities to speak up, and we have put together some recommendations for partner cities that they can do to increase the dialogue with those towns in Poland who are excluding LGBT people. So just some final words, because another question that has come up a few times, and that is actually also, I just mentioned, a part of our campaign, we are asking the European Commission. I think the European Union has a role to play in all of this. Poland is a member country. The European Union has a voice, but also a way of sanctioning member countries by limiting the influx of financial support to the country. So there is something that can be done. And the European Commission and some other European groups have mentioned and have brought up criticism against the Polish government, but I think there can be done more. And I'd be curious to maybe hear from any of you your thoughts on that. If you think the European Union is doing enough, or if not, what your hopes are that can be done. And I think that is also something that many of our members could do, because many of our members live in other European countries, to ask their politicians and their representatives in the European Parliament to speak up on the issues in Poland. But yeah, you'd be curious if you have any other thoughts on what the European Union's role could be in all of this. David.
When it comes to actions from European Union and my perspective, from one hand, I feel like they can do more. And they can act more rigorously on the topic, on many topics actually related to Poland that are currently a cause with European Union. However, from the other hand, I'm quite afraid if with such right-wing body in rule in Poland, wouldn't it be a great move to start an poll exit theory and actions. So I don't have like this hard opinion on that, but I'm afraid that any stronger reaction from European Union to Poland may be an ammunition for right-wing party to propose to leave European Union. As I have a feeling that some actions are currently leading to that, which would be, of course, terrible, because this is something that shouldn't even be a theory on a plate. So no.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting view, actually, David. That too much pressure could actually have the opposite effect and basically support some anti-EU sentiments in some of the politicians that are leading this discussion. Any of you have any closing remarks, any additional comments or questions, or any words to the attendees who are joining this panel today? Feel free to say a few words.
I think that what is happening in Poland since the beginning of 2019 is also a wake-up call for the European communities, because it can happen everywhere. So I know that Europe is looking at us and following what is happening in Poland, also when it comes for the human rights movements and so on. So I know that it's important to be prepared, because the radical far-right movements are everywhere now, unfortunately. But for me, it's take care of yourself also, because taking care of yourself, of our communities, of people around us, it's also a kind of, for me, it's kind of defending when it comes for the hate. So also remember about this. and yeah, be vocal, because it's really, really important for us. And if I can add something about the European Union, I can agree with David. I think that it's a tough topic. It's a difficult topic also for me as an activist for the last 10 years. Because I'm afraid, for example, that it will be also used for, when it comes for the money, it can also be used that the bad LGBT people came and want to took us money from us, and it can also be used against our community. So it's a difficult topic, but I also like looking forward what will happen when it comes to the Commission and European Union, especially that there was a lot of spotlight in media after the letter from the Commission, European Commission, about money in the LGBT-free zone. So it matters also here. So thank you.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you so much, the two of you, for joining us here today for the undistanced session on the situation in Poland. I'm sorry we couldn't get all the panelists on the chat today, but I understand it's an incredibly busy week in Poland leading up to the elections, and I'm sure our guests are having a lot to do on those days. So thank you both for taking the time and for coming here, for answering those questions. Thanks for everyone who joined today and showed interest in the situation in Poland, and thanks for all of your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but thank you. I saw so many messages of support, people who thank you for your work and are sending the love. Yeah, and as all out, we're hoping we can help in any way, so please feel free to reach out to us whenever there's anything we can do. I'm sure that our members are always ready to support you two and all the other activists and community members who are in Poland and fighting this fight right now. So thanks again, and have a great evening in Warsaw and Krakow, sorry, Kraków. And yes, thank you so much. Dziękuję i do widzenia. And thank you both.
Dziękujemy.
Take care.